If you want to become great on the guitar, then you definitely must learn to play scales, and lots of them. But since there are so many different scales in music, this can seem daunting. The good news is, though, is that there's really only one that you absolutely have to know, because this one explains how all of the others are formed. And in this video, I'm going to show you what scale this is, why it's so important, and how to use it to quickly master the guitar. Now, whether you're a beginner and are new to the instrument, or you've been playing for years, by the end of this, you'll learn more than most guitarists do in a lifetime. So jumping right in, what is this all-important scale that I'm talking about? Spoiler, it's not the pentatonic scale that many people focus on to start. Don't worry though, because we'll get to the pentatonic scales in a moment here, and many others that all sound great. But to begin, the most essential scale you need to know on the guitar is the major scale, like this plain old C major scale. And here's why. Because the major scale explains how literally everything else works in music, from how to play all other scales in music to every possible chord. This basic pattern is more powerful than you think. So let's look at exactly why it's so important and versatile. The major scale pattern itself is fairly simple. Starting with the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, the full set of pitches rising and falling in half-step intervals, this group of notes doesn't sound especially musical on its own. So to carve out a more interesting sequence, you just skip some of the notes to get this pattern. This major scale is just a subset of the chromatic scale, formed from an interval pattern of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And while at first it might seem like the sequence is random or oddly asymmetrical, what we're really looking at here is the same pattern of whole step, half step repeated, with a whole step interval in the middle like this. So this C major scale, for example, is C, D, E, F, whole, half, then a whole step, followed by G, A, B, C, another whole, half. This illustration at the top shows the basic pattern, while this diagram shows how to actually play the notes on the guitar, looking down at the fretboard from the perspective of a right-handed player holding the instrument. Now, so far, all we've really looked at is how this major scale is built, but why is it more important than any other scale? Here's why. Because the major scale leads directly to the most powerful pattern of all in music, the circle of fifths. Starting with the C major scale we played before, when you split this pattern in half, it forms two segments, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, where this second half, G, A, B, C, becomes the first part of its own major scale, G major, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And the second half of G major likewise becomes the first part of D major, and so on, where a new major scale begins on the fifth note of the previous scale, eventually cycling through all 12 major scales before returning to C major once again. It's one big cycle, or circle, of fifths, hence the name circle of fifths, where each major scale overlaps with those on either side, just as all colors in the color wheel bleed seamlessly into one another, like this. In fact, using color clearly illustrates all of the connections between the keys, which form this daisy chain loop of interconnected major scales. So this is the first reason the major scale is the most important scale to learn on the guitar, because it forms the most powerful pattern in music, the circle of fifths, which itself illustrates how all scales and keys are related in music. But it gets even better, because now that we can more clearly see the connections between notes in the circle of fifths, C is harmonically related to G, which is closely related to D, then A, etc., we can use these links to see how the chromatic scale is constructed as well, since the circle of fifths is really just a rearrangement of the chromatic scale. Both patterns are made from the same 12 notes, only the chromatic scale is formed by rotating one set of whole steps in the circle of fifths like this. I explained this link between the circle of fifths and the chromatic scale more in other videos, but the point here is that now that you can see the harmonic connections between notes using color, it's easy to understand why any given major scale sounds so good. Like this C major scale, for example. These notes are compatible because they're all neighbors in the circle of fifths. On the guitar, the scale looks like this, while in theory, these notes are informed by their close harmonic connections. Likewise, the G major scale is played like this on the fretboard, while the notes in this pattern share the same connections due to their proximity in the circle of fifths. And as you play through each key, the same patterns apply, where each major scale is harmonically pleasing because of how its notes are related to one another. In this way, you could say the major scale is the link between the circle of fifths and the chromatic scale, the two most fundamental note patterns in music, which form the very framework of the guitar fretboard, where each string is its own chromatic scale, rising in half-step intervals up the frets, while every fret is a column of fifths. So the chromatic scales are plotted horizontally on the fretboard like this, while the circle of fifths is shown vertically to form this perfect grid or matrix of notes, where the major scale of any key is used to move around this matrix, up, down, left, or right, traversing the various strings and frets to make music. It's brilliant. And once you know how the major scale of any key is plotted on this framework of notes, you can navigate the fretboard with ease. In the video notes, there's a link to a PDF for you to explore these patterns in more detail. But the major scale is important for more than just moving around the fretboard. It's essential because it also explains how to play all other patterns in music too, including other scales, every mode, and all chords. And that's because it's the origin or point of reference for all of these other patterns. Take the pentatonic scale, for example, like this C major pentatonic. Now that you know the major scale, it's easy to see how this pentatonic scale is just a subset of that pattern. Penta means 5. This scale has 5 notes, while the major scale, also known as a heptatonic scale, has 7 notes. Hepta means 7. So by omitting 2 notes from the heptatonic scale, you get 5 notes, which is easy enough. Where this same relationship between the pentatonic and major scale in all 12 keys is the same. So that's why it's better to start with the major scale, because the pentatonic scale is actually derived from it. Just as all modes in music are also derived from the major scale, as it turns out. Again, using the C major scale as our example here, the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. But starting on each respective note, we can create a variety of permutations or modes that also sound great, including the Dorian mode, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and the Locrian mode. The same notes are used, which all sound compatible due to their connections in the circle of fifths, but where each mode has a distinct sound that you can use to create all sorts of different songs. Again, you'll find a PDF in the video notes with diagrams of these modes in all keys, and these patterns, likewise, highlight the major scale as the most important scale that you should know. In fact, just like with the modes, all other scales in music are also derived from the major scale as deviations from this pattern, including the harmonic minor scale, for example, which uses the intervals of the major scale as its frame of reference for how exotic it sounds, and the Neapolitan major as another example, which is simply another slight departure from the basic whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half of the major scale, along with the Romanian scale, etc. Playing through all other scales in all keys, they're all merely deviations from the standard major scale. So the major scale informs the circle of fifths, it highlights the very structure of the guitar fretboard, it also explains the pentatonic scale, all modes, and every scale in music. And not only that, but all chords are also derived from this pattern, like these harmonies in the key of C, for example. By combining every other note from the major scale in groups of 3, 7 different chords are formed, which you can play in various inversions up and down the fretboard, in any key, since all 12 keys share the same framework or structure. And this structure ultimately comes back to the little old major scale. So all that said, you can see for yourself that the only scale you really need to know isn't the pentatonic scale, as most people will tell you, it's the major scale, because this pattern essentially explains how all others in music are formed. Granted, we're really only scratching the surface here, so if you want to learn more, check out my other videos. Also, I have a full guitar theory course that explains all of these patterns and concepts in much more detail. It has over 14 hours of video, 2,100 pages of instructions, and 3,300 full color illustrations that help you fully crack the code of music theory for songwriting. So thank you for watching. Please let the algorithm know if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next video.